Caretaker French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has today been in talks with political parties to negotiate passing a budget by the end of the year. Lecornu resigned earlier this week after both sides of politics threatened to topple his government just hours after he announced his cabinet. Well, for more, we have in the studio with us former political advisor in the Sarkozy government, Natanael Bloch. Natanael, it was only on Monday that Prime Minister Lecornu announced his resignation, and yet today we're seeming to hear that he might have cobbled together some sort of solution after talking to the political parties.
That's what even Emmanuel Macron, the French president, asked him to do. He can resign, but trying to find a solution for the budget to be voted before the end of the year. It doesn't mean that Sébastien Lecornu will be again Prime Minister, but at least he may find an alternative solution before Emmanuel Macron chooses what the next step will be in terms of French government.
Well, what will that next step be? He's set to speak to Emmanuel Macron later today and then also make a statement. What do you think will come out of that?
So I think there's like several options. The first one is for Emmanuel Macron to appoint a new Prime Minister, but I would say that the same causes will bring the same consequences. So it's really, for me, unlikely that he will appoint someone from the same political party. But the issue is also that it's very difficult to conceive that he will appoint someone from the far right, for example. The second alternative is to dissolve again the French National Assembly. To do that in France, you have to wait for 1 year between two dissolution. The last one happened more than 1 year ago. So that's an option for Emmanuel Macron. But once again, there's an uncertainty around what will be the next color of the French parliament. The third and last option is for Emmanuel Macron to resign, which some political members of the parliament and the government ask him to do. But that's also something that is very hard to predict, above all in the context of the upcoming city council election in March 2026. So we have three options. The issue is that the three do not look like very optimal.
So who's calling for Emmanuel Macron to resign? Why don't they have confidence in him, and why do they think that he should take responsibility for all this political instability?
So there's first the two extreme parties, the far left and the far right. Not the whole party, but some members of this party obviously asked for Emmanuel Macron to resign. For the far left, it's also because they think that we are at the end of the process of the Fifth Republic and we should go and enter into a Sixth Republic. That's the whole project of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. On the far right side, it's a bit more complicated because what they would like to do, in fact, is accessing power by being appointed Prime Minister. Jordan Bardella is ready. He told the press in France that he's ready to be a Prime Minister. So that's why, in fact, the far right waits for. And in the center, or left or right, you don't have an official position from the parties, but you have some individuals within this party who also call for Emmanuel Macron to resign, just for the simple reason that it seems that since hasn't been elected in the second term of president, he did not really manage to govern the country. We had until now 7 prime ministers. That was a record in the French history. We'll have probably an 8th one, so Emmanuel Macron really breaks all the records, but in a negative sense.
What do the French public think about all of this and amid all this political instability?
So September is always, and October are always like complicated month in France because there are like strikes. There's always like, days of dissatisfaction, and we had that at the beginning of September, kind of a revival of the yellow vest. At the moment in France, there are like 3 topics that French people are very concerned about. There's the cost of living, like a lot of places in the world. There, the security and the immigration question in the context also of the war within the European soil with Ukraine and Russia, which did not happen for like decades, in fact, since the end of the Second World War. And the third, obviously, is the political instability, because the issue with having like prime minister after prime minister is that you can't vote a single law because, MPs change all the time. So there's like important law. I'm thinking about the pension reform, for example, that has not been moved at all, even if it was one of the promises of Emmanuel Macron when he was elected for his second mandate.
Do you think it's time for Emmanuel Macron to consider his position? He's more popular, he appears to be more popular outside of the country than he does domestically.
That was always the case of Emmanuel Macron. He was always more popular on the international scene than he was on the domestic scene. One of the first things that Emmanuel Macron implemented as a policy was in fact something that is also, I would say, of importance for Australia, is the Indo-Pacific strategy. But on the domestic scene, since in fact the yellow vest that appeared a couple of years ago, Emmanuel Macron was always challenged. And there's a bit of this discrepancy between the vision that other leaders, other countries have of a young president, a former banker, more modern than the previous ones. And in fact, the reality in France, where in fact his popularity is quite low at the moment, and even the popularity of its government not only is low, but also most of the new ministers are completely unknown for the majority of the French citizens, which is always something very strange when you're not even able to say a name or name one or a couple of ministers.
But you don't think he will resign amid all of this instability?
I find it very complicated for the reason that, once again, in 6 months' time, we have very important election in 36,000 cities, small and big cities in France, and that would add a massive complexity into the process of this local and city council election. So I think if there's an option for him to resign, it may probably be after March 2026 and before the presidential election in April-May 2027. But once again, nothing is more sure than that, because there is nothing that forces, in fact, Emmanuel Macron to resign. He could remain until the end of his second mandate, appointing prime minister after prime minister. So I think it's possible, but it's really unlikely.
Okay, well, indeed, we have an interesting few months ahead at the very least. Natanael Bloch, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Evan.